The announcement came through a video call that pretended to be collaborative. White background, minimalist slides. Roger Bliss, head of operational efficiency, appeared on screen looking well-rested, confident in the way men do when consequences have never learned their names. "We're optimizing operations," he said, smiling softly. "Some roles have become redundant." That was when my name surfaced. Landon Reese. Regulatory oversight. Do you know? Right now. My hands are ice cold. I wonder how it is where you are. What's the temperature right now? And if you're still sitting here listening to me, please leave me your lucky number. To warm my heart a little. He called it legacy overhead. Said the company needed to move faster, lighter, leaner. His words were polished, rehearsed, designed to sound intelligent without actually meaning anything. I didn't interrupt. I saved my work instead. Roger Bliss had the look of someone who believed authority lived in meetings, in job titles, in slide decks filled with confident verbs. What he didn't understand was that authority doesn't announce itself. It registers. For over a decade, my name had been tied to every operating license this company depended on to function: environmental clearance, interstate authorization, safety certification. Not my department's name, not the company's, mine. While Roger talked about modernizing compliance, I archived copies of every licensing record, quietly, methodically. He spoke about automation like it was a spell you could chant over regulation and make it disappear. After the call ended, access started vanishing, system by system, dashboard by dashboard. No explanation, just removal. HR followed later with a polite message and a folder, standard phrasing, redundancy, streamlining, nothing personal. I signed, not because I was cornered, because I knew exactly what signing activated. As I logged out for the last time, Roger Bliss sent one final message. "Hope you understand. This is just business." I did understand, because business isn't about vision or confidence, it's about permissions, and by removing me, they hadn't eliminated redundancy. They had eliminated the only legal authority holding the doors open. They just didn't know it yet. What you just heard was the emotional truth. The rest will contain some fictional elements and use AI to clarify the lesson and the underlying emotions. Hopefully this resonates with you. If not, please allow yourself to rest early. I woke up the next morning without an alarm, without a calendar pinging me to renew something that only I knew existed. Old habits die slow. I still reached for my laptop out of muscle memory, then stopped, instead. I made coffee and opened my personal inbox. 3 messages, all indirect, all confused. One from a junior analyst asking if I still had access to the licensing dashboard. Another from procurement wondering why a vendor had flagged our status as inactive pending verification. The third was silent, a forwarded screenshot from someone inside the company. No text attached. The dashboard was turning red. Inside the building, they were discovering what redundancy actually meant. Roger Bliss had assumed compliance was a function, not a person. Something you could reroute, automate, or hand to someone younger with a cleaner resume. He hadn't realized that every operating license had a living endpoint, a legal name tied to accountability. Mine? Without that endpoint, systems didn't fail loudly. They stalled. Vendors paused shipments. External portals rejected uploads. Automated reports returned neutral errors that sounded harmless, but weren't. Contact certifying authority. There was no certifying authority anymore. Inside the company, meetings multiplied. Explanations didn't. People tried refreshing dashboards like that would fix legal reality. Someone reassigned my old credentials to a new hire and learned very quickly that permissions don't transfer with confidence. By midday, legal was involved. By afternoon, finance noticed the freeze. No invoices processed. No approvals clearing. Nothing catastrophic, yet just enough friction to make people nervous. That's how real damage begins. I didn't celebrate. I didn't intervene. I watched quietly as messages kept coming, each more careful than the last. No one accused me of anything. They couldn't. Everything unfolding was procedural, automatic, exactly as designed. A system doing what it was told. Late in the day, a message finally arrived from Roger Bliss. Short, polite, professional. Quick question, can we talk about the licensing framework you managed? I read it twice, then closed my laptop. Inside the company, confusion started hardening into fear. The dashboards didn't crash. They didn't scream. They simply refused to cooperate. Neutral alerts, polite warnings, language engineered to sound fixable. Verification required. Authorization missing. Credential holder not found. Someone tried rerouting approval authority to a deputy. The request bounced back. Someone else attempted to upload renewal documents manually. Rejected. The system wasn't broken. It was obedient. Every license was still there. What was missing was the person legally allowed to stand behind them. Meetings multiplied. Whiteboards filled. Acronyms flew. Roger Bliss chaired one of them with forced calm, insisting this was a transitional hiccup, a matter of configuration, a gap that could be patched. Legal disagreed. Compliance wasn't a role you reassigned. It was a chain of accountability anchored to a registered name. External systems didn't care about internal optimism or restructuring memos. They cared about signatures. Mine. Outside vendors began asking questions, then holding shipments. Not canceling, just waiting. Waiting is worse. Waiting freezes money without triggering alarms, loud enough for leadership to notice immediately. Finance noticed next. Invoices stalled. Approvals delayed. Forecasts quietly revised downward without explanation. Someone finally pulled my contract. Someone finally read the clause. Termination of employment invalidates all company-sponsored licensing authority associated with the signatory. Clean, unemotional, absolute. I learned about this secondhand. Through a forwarded screenshot, no commentary, no apology, just highlighted text and the sudden realization spreading through people who had assumed compliance was decorative. Roger Bliss sent another message, longer this time, careful language, no assumptions. We're trying to understand the scope of what you managed. I didn't reply, because scope was something I had spent years documenting, mapping, protecting, and they had erased the only person who understood its boundaries. This wasn't sabotage. This wasn't retaliation. This was what happens when systems follow rules more faithfully than people do. Somewhere inside the building, someone asked the wrong question. How do we override this? And that's when the real damage began. Because systems don't respond well to being forced. Panic didn't arrive all at once. It leaked. First through legal, then finance, then compliance, a slow realization spreading across departments that had always treated regulation as background noise, a cost center, something to manage quietly. As long as it stayed invisible. It wasn't invisible anymore. Someone from legal finally traced the failures backward, following the audit logs like footprints in wet cement. Every dead end pointed to the same absence. Not a missing document, not an expired form, a missing name. They pulled my employment contract from storage. Dusty file, old template, amended more times than anyone remembered. Buried inside was the clause short, unassuming, lethal. Upon termination, all company-sponsored licenses associated with the signatory shall be considered void. No grace period, no exception language, no workaround. They had fired the license. Inside a closed-door meeting, Roger Bliss stared at the screen while someone read the clause aloud. He didn't interrupt, didn't argue. He just sat there, hands folded. Like posture alone could reverse consequences. Can we transfer it? Someone asked. Legal shook their head. Licenses weren't assets. They were authorities, issued to individuals, not departments. Re-registration wasn't an update. It was a process, one measured in weeks, not optimism. Another voice tried anyway. Can we override the system? That was when compliance finally spoke. Overrides triggered reports, automatic ones, external ones, every unauthorized access attempt, every forced credential edit, logged and transmitted to oversight bodies that did not appreciate experimentation. Silence followed, the kind where everyone understands the mistake at the same time. Roger Bliss broke it. We need her cooperation. No one responded. Because cooperation isn't something you request after erasure. Outside the building, I was living quietly. No notifications, no dashboards, just messages stacking up unanswered, each more respectful than the last. No demands, no threats, just questions shaped like apologies. One message stood out, forwarded internally. No sender. Do we have any documentation on why Landon Reese was designated redundant? There was no answer attached, because redundancy only exists on paper until the system asks who's responsible. And there was no one left to answer. They hadn't removed a role. They had removed accountability. And accountability, once gone, doesn't negotiate. Once the clause was understood, the tone changed. Meetings stopped pretending to be collaborative. Doors closed, voices lowered. The language shifted from strategy to containment. Not fixing the problem, managing the fallout. Someone suggested a consultant. Someone else proposed an interim signatory. Both ideas died quickly. External authorities didn't recognize placeholders. They recognized names, histories, and accountability trails that couldn't be fabricated on short notice. Roger Bliss stopped chairing meetings and started pacing them. He requested access logs, then approval chains, then my old documentation folders, the ones he had dismissed as excessive. Someone finally admitted they didn't know where half of it lived. I had built those systems quietly, assuming continuity mattered. It hadn't. They tried calling. Not directly at first. Messages came through intermediaries, former colleagues, polite inquiries disguised as casual check-ins. I didn't answer, not out of spite, but because there was nothing to clarify. Everything was already written down. When indirect contact failed, Roger tried again. "We're exploring options." He wrote, "Would appreciate context." Context was something he had removed. Inside the company, pressure mounted from outside. Vendors requested written assurances that couldn't be provided. Clients began asking uncomfortable questions, the kind that didn't accuse, just documented. "Please confirm your current compliance status." Silence is dangerous in regulated industries. Silence becomes evidence. Someone attempted to manually resubmit credentials using archived copies. The system flagged the attempt and locked the account. Another report was generated. Another notification sent. The system wasn't punishing them. It was protecting itself. Legal advised against further experimentation. Every failed attempt expanded the record. Every log made reauthorization harder. The company was now leaving footprints everywhere it went. That's when leadership finally noticed. Not the problem, the exposure. This wasn't about one license anymore. It was about pattern, about whether the company could be trusted to govern itself. Roger Bliss requested a private meeting with the executive team. He arrived with charts, explanations, carefully framed responsibility that never quite landed on him. Someone asked the simplest question in the room. Why was the certifying authority classified as redundant? Roger didn't answer right away, because for the first time, efficiency had no language that fit, and outside their walls, the system kept recording, quietly, faithfully, just like it always had. The first notice didn't arrive with urgency, it arrived with neutrality, a formal request for verification. No accusation, no deadline emphasized. Just a standard inquiry routed through channels that never spoke unless something mattered. Inside the company, it landed like a dropped plate. External agencies didn't ask twice. They didn't negotiate. They didn't care about restructuring initiatives or internal confusion. They cared about continuity, and continuity required a living, registered authority. There wasn't one. Someone tried responding with documentation. The response bounced back. Invalid signatory. Another attempt followed, another rejection. Each failure added another line to a record no one wanted expanded. Clients began copying legal on emails. Not threatening, just careful. Careful emails are worse than angry ones. They indicate preparation. Please confirm operational compliance status before proceeding. Vendors paused shipments outright, not permanently, just until clarity was restored. Clarity is expensive when you don't have it. Roger Bliss stopped sending messages. He started making calls. The first call went to legal, then to finance, then to an outside advisory firm that charged by the hour and asked the same question everyone else had avoided. Who is your current certifying authority? There was no good answer. Internally, access logs told their own story. Attempts to override permissions, attempts to impersonate credentials, each one logged, each one transmitted outward as part of routine monitoring. No alarms, no warnings, just evidence. Someone finally suggested reaching out to me formally, not through back channels, not through former colleagues, officially. A message arrived from the executive office, polite, restrained, carefully worded to avoid admissions. We recognize your prior role and expertise. We would like to discuss potential paths forward. I read it once. They weren't asking for help. They were asking for silence, for cooperation that would allow them to stabilize before consequences became permanent. But systems don't pause for negotiations. The more they delayed resolution, the more the record grew. Each unanswered inquiry, each stalled process, each paused contract quietly documented. This wasn't about one mistake anymore. It was about whether the company could demonstrate control. And control, once questioned, is hard to restore. Somewhere in a conference room, someone realized they weren't waiting for permission. They were waiting for me, and I was in no hurry. A formal invitation arrived, wrapped in neutral phrasing and cautious respect. No apologies, no admissions, just an offer to discuss options. That was how you knew the ground had shifted. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I reviewed what they were facing, not out of curiosity, but out of habit. Public notices, vendor updates, subtle language changes in client communications, words like temporary, pending, awaiting confirmation began appearing where confidence used to live. That's when leverage becomes measurable. Inside the company, they were learning the cost of absence. Every paused process had a downstream effect. One delay turned into 3. One unanswered inquiry became a pattern. Patterns invite scrutiny. Roger Bliss resurfaced in the thread. His tone had changed. Shorter sentences, fewer adjectives, no efficiency language left to hide behind. "We need your guidance," he wrote. Guidance was an interesting word. It implied I was still responsible. I wasn't, but I was still relevant. I drafted a response and didn't send it. Then I rewrote it shorter, removed explanations, removed history, left only facts. There is no active certifying authority. Reauthorization requires a registered individual and a full review cycle. No blame, no threat, just reality. The reply came quickly. What would it take to resolve this? That was the moment everything clarified. They weren't asking how to fix the system. They were asking how to regain control without admitting they had lost it. Control, however, doesn't come cheap once it's gone. I closed my laptop. Because leverage works best when it's not rushed, when it's allowed to settle into the room and make people uncomfortable enough to say the quiet parts out loud. Inside their walls, someone finally said my name without dismissiveness. Outside their walls, the system kept recording, waiting, just like I was. Consulting engagement draft. They weren't calling it a return. They weren't calling it a reversal. Words like mistake and termination never appeared. Instead, the document spoke in careful abstractions: temporary authority, advisory scope, transitional oversight, control, rented back in pieces. I read it slowly, not for the money, though the number was generous, but for what it avoided. No acknowledgement of fault, no protection for future interference, no language preventing another optimization once stability was restored. They wanted access without accountability. Inside the company, pressure had crossed a threshold. External agencies had moved from inquiries to expectations. Clients wanted timelines. Vendors wanted assurances in writing. Legal wanted predictability. Predictability requires ownership. The offer tried to bypass that. Roger Bliss's name appeared nowhere on the document, which told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't leading this anymore. He was being managed. I drafted a response in plain language. I'm not available for advisory roles. Short, accurate. The follow-up came quickly. What terms would make this viable? That was progress. I replied with a revised document. Not aggressive, not punitive, just precise. Full reinstatement of authority. Independent reporting line. Contractual non-interference. Compensation structured around duration, not outcome. And one additional clause. Any future termination would require written notice and regulatory transition completed prior to separation. They hesitated. Not because it was unreasonable, because it made erasure impossible inside their walls. The debate shifted. Not whether they needed me that was settled, but how much control they were willing to surrender to regain stability. I didn't push. I waited. Leverage doesn't require pressure. It requires time. Outside their walls. The system continued its quiet work. Logging delays, recording non-responses, preserving a narrative no one could rewrite. Eventually, another message arrived. Can we discuss your terms? I closed the document. Because discussions only matter once both sides accept the same reality. They weren't negotiating a role. They were negotiating survival. They scheduled the call as a discussion. No agenda attached. That alone told me they were done pretending. The screen filled with familiar faces. All carefully neutral, legal, finance. Someone from compliance who used to report to me and now looked uncomfortable occupying my old language. Roger Bliss joined last. Quieter than I remembered. No one started with small talk. We understand your position, legal began, and we want to move forward constructively. Constructive was the word people use when they've run out of leverage. I listened. Let them outline urgency without naming it. Vendor exposure, client confidence, regulatory posture, everything framed as temporary, as if the situation might resolve itself if spoken about delicately enough. Then they asked, what would reinstatement look like? Not if. What? I explained calmly. Authority restored. Reporting independence. Documentation control returned. No retroactive blame assigned to me for failures that occurred in my absence. Silence followed. The kind that isn't disagreement, just arithmetic being done in real time. Roger Bliss cleared his throat. We're aligned on resolution, he said, avoiding my eyes. But this structure limits operational flexibility. Operational flexibility had cost them everything. I didn't argue. I didn't persuade. I stated facts. Systems required continuity. Oversight required independence. Compliance failed fastest when managed by efficiency metrics. Someone from finance nodded. Someone from legal stopped taking notes and started listening. Then came the final question. And if we don't agree, I answered honestly, then nothing changes. That was the moment they understood. I wasn't threatening collapse. Collapse was already underway. I was simply the only path back to control. They asked for time. I gave it. Because pressure wasn't necessary anymore. Reality was doing the work for me. When the call ended, Roger Bliss remained on screen a second longer than everyone else. He looked smaller. Not defeated, just displaced. Landon, he said. We misjudged. I closed my laptop. Because misjudgment isn't something you correct with words. It's something you live with. They accepted the terms. Not because they agreed with them, but because there were no alternatives left that didn't involve public consequences. Authority was restored. Reporting lines clarified. The system stabilized quietly, the way it always had when it was respected. I returned without ceremony. No announcement, no apology tour. Just my name reappearing where it had always belonged in registries that mattered more than org charts ever could. Processes resumed. Vendors released holds. Clients stopped asking questions once answers existed again. Roger Bliss didn't attend the follow-up meetings. His role was restructured. That was the word they used, efficiency, applied correctly. Has a way of finding its true targets. I didn't stay long. Once continuity was secured and a successor properly registered, I stepped away on my own terms. Clean transition, documented handoff, no gaps left behind. Later, I heard people still referred to the incident as a lesson in over-optimization. They were wrong. It was a lesson in mistaking visibility for authority. Systems don't remember who spoke the loudest in meetings. They remember who was accountable when it mattered. And accountability, once proven, doesn't disappear. It simply waits. There's a moment that stays with me more than the meetings, the contracts, or the silence that followed. It's the quiet after you realize no one is coming to save you, and that what you choose next will define who you are, not just what happens to them. I didn't feel victorious. I felt steady, like standing in a room you helped build, knowing every wall, every wire, every rule, and realizing that power isn't about raising your voice. It's about knowing where responsibility truly lives. What stayed with me was the question I never asked out loud. If I had fixed everything quietly and walked away poorer but praised, would that have been the right thing to do? Or is it more ethical to let systems face the consequences of how they treat people? That's the uncomfortable part. Doing the right thing doesn't always look kind in the moment. Sometimes it looks like restraint. Sometimes it looks like saying nothing and letting the truth surface on its own. If you were in my place, underestimated, erased, then suddenly needed, what would you choose? Would you rush back to prove your worth? Or would you pause long enough to decide what your worth actually means? As you're listening, tell me, where are you listening from right now? Somewhere quiet, somewhere familiar, somewhere that reminds you why stories like this matter. If this story made you feel seen, your subscribe helps it reach someone else who might need that feeling today. A like or share isn't just support for this channel, it's a signal that these stories deserve to exist. This story was fully created and produced by our team. We do not copy or borrow content from any other channel. Thank you for staying with us and listening until the end.